Hi, this is Gabrielle Princeby. I'm with David Sloan Wilson, and we are with Evolution, This View of Life, the online evolution magazine. We are at a meeting funded by the AERA entitled Evolutionary Perspectives on Educational Research, Policy, and Practice. And we're sitting here with David Lancy, who gave a talk. David is from Utah State University, and the title of his talk is Taming the Autonomous Learner. So David, I'd like to hear a bit about what you shared during your talk, some of your main ideas and their implications.
Well, my talk was at least partly historical because I talked about my fieldwork in Liberia, which was over 40 years ago. And one of the first epiphanies or impressions that I had there as I was looking at children and their lives was really how different, how in really very important ways that the experience of childhood was so different than what we assumed it to be in the United States. And I was the anthropologist, but prior to that I had been in developmental psychology. So I brought those two perspectives there. And my talk really focused on the question of what is the role of teaching, especially by parents, in children's development and in their acquisition of their culture, in the transmission of culture. And I think we tend to assume at both the scientific as well as the folk level in the West, in the United States in particular, we tend to assume that parents loom very, very large, that they play a huge role in directly teaching children their culture, and then there are others involved. But the assumption is that, by and large, just as we do, it was assumed that people in other cultures also, children in other cultures also, depended heavily on being taught how to do things. I saw almost no teaching. In fact, as I probed further, and I gave this one of these examples, as I probed further into skills that I thought were likely to have been taught, that they must have been because they were complex and it wasn't easy to figure out. I, as a naive person, couldn't figure out immediately how to do them. And as I probed that and looked specifically at that, I kept running into case after case after case of where individuals either said, oh no, I approached someone for a little help, but they rebuffed me and I just figured it out on my own. And then I did one particular case study of a mother and her daughter because they were I noticed them sitting together, each working on a fishnet. And I thought, oh, this is it. Now we're going to see teaching. So I watched for quite a while, and there was very little verbal interaction whatsoever. And what there was had nothing to do with the task at hand. And the little girl didn't ask her mom for any help. And the mom didn't volunteer any direction or guidance. So I asked them about, well, are you teaching her how to do this? And she said, oh, no, not at all. She's probably not ready to learn it now. I mean, she didn't even speak, her daughter's there listening. She didn't even speak in a kind of encouraging way, in a scaffolding sort of way of oh, I don't have to teach her, she's so good. No, there was none of that. It was, oh, she'll probably not learn it this time, actually. She's picked it up a few times. But some years later, down the road, in effect, she'll figure it out. She'll learn it, and that'll be just fine. And then I said, well, did anybody teach you? How did you learn to do it? Oh, just the same way. I said, your mother didn't teach you? Oh, of course not, And so that was an epiphany, and that was a long time ago. Right. And
so this is really shocking from the Western perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it was shocking.
It really teaches us. And tell us a little bit about weird, what weird means.
So there's this extremely helpful article published 3 years ago now, in Behavioral and Brain Sciences called The Weirdest People in the World. And this was, unlike the anthropologists' kind of anecdotal send-up of these myths and assumptions, this was a very systematic study done by psychologists, economists, who very systematically looked at wherever there was an opportunity to look at data particularly studies with adolescents and adults, anything to look at data, almost of any kind of psychological data where there were cross-national comparison opportunities, multiple site studies that had been done where there was actual quantitative data on various measures, including things like susceptibility to persuasion and other kinds of measures of other traits, characteristics like that. In study after study after study, the U.S. samples were outliers. And so their point was, what are we doing arguing on this data that's mostly collected from American college students? What are we doing generalizing from that to the world? I mean, they were attacking the idea that somehow you could build theory, evolutionary theory, any other kind of theory, on the basis of data collected from this really, really weird society.
And weird stands for white, Western industrial.
Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic.
Right.
Actually, I can quibble with that because we share a great deal of our child rearing values with East Asian societies, and so there are actually probably more similarities there, but they're left out because it's Western in order to spell weird. So, but with my talk, getting back to that, in addition to the evidence, the first part was really talking about what evidence do we have for teaching in the traditional context of learning one's culture. And then I transitioned to kind of a part B where I basically made the rhetorical argument, well, there are formal institutions, aside from the informal learning of culture that seems to go on all around. There are formal institutions in non-Western societies that aren't schools, but have some of the do seem to have a pedagogical function, an educational function, and they do seem to have some of the characteristics of schooling. What do they look like? What is the pedagogy there? What is their teaching, and what does it look like? And so I reviewed apprenticeship as one type of formal institution in which learning goes on. Initiation rites, also called Bush schools. And then I looked at village schools, sort of newly introduced and still kind of only a general approximation to schools that we know. And I also looked at the earliest schools and claimed that they were derived from apprenticeship. And so in all of those cases, and we're talking about accumulation now over upwards of 100 different cases of examples of either initiation rites or apprenticeships and so on, looking for what goes on, what's the teaching learning process. And the only sort of pedagogical principle that they all had in common and was most prominent, most evident, was on the part of the adult teacher or master or whatever you want to call them. The only thing that they all held in common, all these examples, was the master caused the novice pain. That was the only common denominator. And then other things went on that were corollary to that, like almost in every case, in every situation, the novice, the younger person, was humiliated, made to feel stupid, impressed with how little they knew, forced to do menial chores, and so on and so on and so on. And you say to yourself, well, gosh, that's not very inspiring, is it? But to me, the takeaway message to me was, there's again potential evidence of teaching, in our sense of teaching, of what we mean by that, and it doesn't happen. Something quite different going on there, which is, in a sense, designed to influence and change the behavior of children. But gosh, is this something that we want to extract and say this should be replicated?
Well, this is so shocking from the provincial view of being immersed in our own culture.
Right.
And the Well, now, I mean, cultural transmission is taking place. All of these cultures
Right.
have information that is being transmitted, just not in the way that we thought.
Right.
And so what does this mean for modern education?
Right.
What does it mean for our own system?
Right. Well, I think that a number of these issues emerged during our discussions, and I think one of the most important for me personally is that we really, really have to use this information to resist what I think is the myth, which is that everybody can teach, and as everybody is kind of good at it, really. I mean, I taught myself in a teacher preparation program for three and a half years. And I can tell you quite honestly that the majority of the students and I taught the introductory class for elementary school teachers, and I can tell you that the majority of them, when queried by me, because I was, this was a research opportunity, when queried by me, the vast majority of them thought they didn't really need this class. They already knew how to teach. And they would say, well, I've taught kids in kindergarten, I've taught, this, that, and another thing. And this is a widespread view.
So the idea that you're a natural borner, that everyone is a native teacher, is not...
And that everybody should love teaching, that there should be this... I've spoken with parents, mothers, almost in tears, who said, I'm so relieved by what you're saying about parents not playing with their children, which is another area of work that I've done a lot of work on, or teaching their children, because I don't really enjoy playing with the children. I don't really feel, I don't know how to teach. I don't feel good about teaching them, I talked a little bit about so-called dry cleaner parents. I guess I'm confounding this with an interview I had in the BBC this morning. I'm sorry, but I talked to them about their audience about dry cleaner parents. And dry cleaner parents in the United States this is a term coined by teachers, I think, and it basically refers to parents who bring their kids to school kind of all mussed up, in effect, not really having done their homework or whatever, not shaped up at all in any shape or form. They give them to the teachers and they expect to be delivered back to the parents at the end of the day, all clean and tidy and pressed and in a plastic cover. And that's their shorthand way of saying, in a disappointed way, our parents just don't help us very much. They don't do that. And so we either...
But you're saying that in other cultures that's normative.
That's normative, exactly.
These aren't bad parents.
Exactly.
They're just, that's the norm. That's the way it is in other cultures.
When I was at Toledo, I spent time kind of shadowing teachers in an inner city school, and followed them, for example, when they would go to have a meeting with the parents in the projects that serviced these, that provided the population of students for these schools. And they would meet with these parents, and they would start off in this sort of obligatory speech that says, we're here to work with you and we'd like your cooperation. We want to hear what you have to say. We're interested in what you have to say. And then the parents are going, like, yeah. And then they proceeded to the next hour of the time, whatever was available, to talk down to the parents, to lecture them on what they should be doing with the kids and what's wrong with their kids' preparedness, and the frustration of the parents was just so evident, and one parent, I remember one occasion, one parent finally let him have it, and these were black teachers. These weren't, you would think, oh, well, that's again another myth, that somehow if we put African American teachers in schools serving African American kids, they're going to be really empathetic to the culture and the problems and issues and so on. Far from it. They were probably the most racist or unsympathetic. They're solidly middle class, good, sober Christians, and they clearly disapproved in more ways
so
than
what's
one.
what's the prognosis? Should we be embracing our distinctive form of education, or should we be questioning it?
Well, I think we should be questioning it. And if I might anticipate your wrap-up question here, as you're asking all of us, okay, what's the payoff? What's the
added value of approaching education
right,
from an
and
evolutionary
I think,
perspective?
My immediate reaction when you posed that was, well, one thing that evolution does for you is it forces you to take a big picture approach. And I think that it certainly can't hurt our understanding of education, the challenges that we face. It certainly can't hurt to back off and take a big picture approach, because I've been involved in varying degrees in education research pretty much my whole career, and in different kinds of educational institutions. I mean, a huge variety of different kinds of schools in different parts of the world. And I've seen a lot of what I would consider to be really bad practice. But the bad practice is often rooted in some kind of theory, some sort of empirical support. During our discussions, we touched on neurological research and its implications for the school, and I had this vivid flashback to this period when the split brain discussion took over and just became this huge runaway fad. And so I think evolution is solid. It's not just a fly-by-night idea that's going to go away with the next study that's published and say, well, forget that idea. No, it's here to stay. It's very solid. It's well established. It takes into account so many things that are important, I think, in any theorizing, but which we tend to ignore, such as history. It takes culture into account, cross-cultural variation into account, which is what I'm all about. It takes biology into account, psychology. I mean, it's got it all, and so in a way, it's a kind of I think it provides for us a corrective, because it forces us to really closely examine our assumptions and put them through some rigorous tests. So part of our discussion today was, these interventions that are going on here that you've described for us really, really are exciting and they're wonderful. But what's going to happen when they're out in the real world? What happens when you scale them up? And it's that kind of challenge to thinking that I think automatically evolution provides. You can't go very far down that road when you're looking at whatever area is of greatest concern to you in terms of curriculum or teaching. You can't go very far down that road when you begin to have to now look at what you're doing from many different angles. And I think that's healthy and will provide improvements, bound to.
Perfect. So thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
David.
My pleasure.